Opioids. I mean, on one hand, they're some of the most effective painkillers we've ever discovered. Genuinely a medical marvel. But, the other side of the story. They're also at the very center of a devastating public health crisis. So how can one single substance be both a savior and a destroyer? It's a huge paradox, right? Well, today we're going to dig into the science to figure that out.
And this is not a new problem. Not at all. This dual nature, this incredible relief paired with incredible danger, it's something we've known about for centuries. It really stretches all the way back to the very first uses of the opium poppy.
So this is the fundamental conflict we're dealing with. On one side, you have a miracle drug that can ease just the most profound suffering, and on the other, it's a source of addiction and overdose. The big question is, how does the exact same drug do both of these things? Well, the answer, it's hidden deep inside our own biology.
To get to that answer, here's a quick look at our roadmap. We've just touched on the paradox itself. Next, we're going to explore the body's lock and key system, then see how that one system creates both the good and the bad effects. After that, we'll get into why your genes matter so much, and finally, we'll look at the search for a much, much safer opioid.
Okay, so let's dive into the biology here. To really understand how opioids work, you just need to picture this one really simple metaphor. Think of a system of locks and keys. And this system is operating all throughout your nervous system right now. So the lock in our story is a very specialized protein that sits on the surface of your cells. It's called an opioid receptor. The key is the opioid molecule itself. Doesn't matter if it's morphine from a plant or a synthetic one like fentanyl. When that key fits perfectly into the lock, bam, it sends a message inside the cell. And that message kicks off a pretty simple chain of events. First, the key fits the lock. Then, the lock turns, and this activates something called a G protein. And finally, that G protein opens a door, which changes what the cell is doing. This simple action right here is the basis for every single effect an opioid has on your body.
Now, this little molecular machine, it has a proper name. It's a G protein-coupled receptor, or GPCR for short. And you have to appreciate, this thing is an incredibly sophisticated piece of biological engineering. It's designed to do just one thing, but to do it perfectly. Translate a signal from the outside of the cell into an action on the inside.
So, if it's just one key fitting into one lock, how on earth do we get so many different outcomes? Everything from amazing pain relief to life-threatening side effects. Well, it turns out that one key can actually open several different doors.
And this really brings us to the absolute core of the paradox. You've got one interaction, the opioid binding to the receptor, but it produces this whole spectrum of effects. How is that even possible?
So here's the big secret. When that lock turns, it doesn't just open one single door. Nope. It actually kicks off two totally different chemical pathways inside the cell. The first one, the G protein pathway, that's the good stuff. That's what leads to the pain relief we're looking for. But there's a second pathway, and this one is triggered by a protein called beta-arrestin. And that's the one responsible for those really dangerous and sometimes deadly side effects.
And you can see the split so clearly right here. Analgesia, the effect we actually want, is driven by that G protein pathway. But then you have respiratory depression, which is the main cause of overdose deaths, and that's linked directly to the beta-arrestin pathway. Two paths, two very, very different outcomes, all starting from a single key turning a single lock.
But here's another wrinkle. This whole mechanism, it doesn't work the exact same way in everybody. So why does one dose of an opioid work perfectly for one person, but not for another? Well, the reason for that is written in our DNA. Think back to our lock and key metaphor. A tiny, super common variation in the gene that actually builds the lock, that opioid receptor, can slightly change its shape. In genetics, this is called a single nucleotide polymorphism, or SNNP, and that one small change can make it harder or maybe even easier for the opioid key to fit in and turn. And the clinical data on this is really clear. There was this huge analysis of over 4,600 patients, and it focused on one specific genetic variant. What it found was that people who carry this variant consistently needed higher doses of opioids just to get the same level of pain relief. So for these individuals, morphine is just less potent. It doesn't work as well. Their lock is a slightly different shape, and that leads to a weaker response. It's basically a genetic lottery, and it explains why a standard dose is such an unpredictable thing from person to person. Okay, so if the problem is a key that opens both good and bad doors, and a lock that varies from person to person, what's the solution? Well, the answer just might lie in designing a better key.
And this right here, this is basically the holy grail for modern opioid research. It's a concept called biased agonism. The whole goal is to create a new key, a new drug that's, well, biased. It's specifically designed to only turn the lock in a way that activates that good G protein pathway, the one for pain relief, while completely, totally ignoring that dangerous beta-arrestin pathway.
Just think about the difference for a second. Morphine, it activates both pathways, the good and the bad. A biased drug, on the other hand, would be selective. It would hit only the G protein pathway we want and leave that dangerous one alone. That's the dream, right? All of the pain relief with none of the risk.
And this isn't just science fiction. It's already happening in the lab. Research on a potential new drug, a compound called PZM-21, found that in animal models, it did exactly what they hoped it would. It suppressed pain without causing those dangerous side effects. This is the proof of concept that shows this can actually work.
So this brings us to the final and most critical question. By truly understanding the lock, the key, and the different doors they open, are we on the verge of actually engineering a future where we can have the miracle of pain relief from opioids without the deadly paradox? The science suggests it just might be possible.